Previously, we talked about the 4 general rules of English linking, as well as the 4 big exceptions to those rules. And those 2 lessons cover a lot of what you need to know about English linking overall. Today, we're talking about some more specific things that will cover the remaining major linking rules, and some of them you might not have heard about from other teachers, such as what I like to call anti-linking. Hi, I'm Josh, your American English guide, and this is English Hacks Pronunciation, where I help you to sound more like a native if you want, and to understand natural speech better. Now first, it's very important that you do not try to memorize all of these rules. That is not going to help you very much. Instead, you want to use this lesson as a guide and a reference in order to start noticing these things in the speech of natives, as well as to start slowly adopting them into your own speech. Remember, knowledge is not skill, so just memorizing these rules won't help you very much. As we go through these rules, I will be giving you some examples, which will also sometimes include using these inside of words and not just between words. But for more examples, I strongly recommend that you go to Youglish. Now the first rule we're going to talk about is what I like to call stacking. This is technically called co-articulation, or sometimes you'll hear it called overlapping. Now the first big stacking rule that you will usually hear about is D plus N. And that is because between 2 words, the D and the N will sound like they sort of go on top of each other, and we get a special thing going on between the mouth and the nose. So if you go into the D position, which remember, this is your top teeth here, top of your mouth, the D is going to go here, not touching the teeth, and the N is also going to go in the same place. T, D, and N share the same position. And then what we're going to do, we're going to say, for example, bad, but instead of releasing that, okay, if we say bad news, we're not going to release it. We're going to go into that D, and we're going to sort of hold it there. And then we're just going to release the N through the nose. Bad news, bad news. Okay, so you can hear it kind of gets caught in the nose. Bad news, bad news. Or another example, he said no, he said no. In addition, another common stacking rule is with D plus L. And again, this has to do with the closeness of the positions of these sounds. For example, in hard look, we're going to go into that D like normal, and the L, it doesn't have to touch the tongue, it can. It could just be up here. Okay, it's not going to be straight up like that. I have lessons for the L that you can watch, but all you have to do is you go into that D, and we know that the tongue is going to stop the airflow. And then we're not going to release the D, right? So hard, we hold it there for a quick moment. And then you're just going to bring the sides of the tongue in, which will allow the air to flow without actually moving the position of your tongue. And that's going to create this stacking effect. Hard look, hard look. Or another example, good luck, good luck. And one more example that you might not have heard about before is non-lip consonant plus W. The lip consonants are P, B, M, right? Because we use the lips. So any consonant that is not the lips, and then after that is a W sound at the start of the next word. For example, on what? So here we get that overlap effect, or that stacking effect, because you close the N, you bring the lips out, the lips are independent, okay? So you bring the tongue up, you bring the lips out, on what? And so you hold that N until the lips are out, and then you release the N and open the W, on what? Or we can say, pick one, pick one. So there you're releasing the K into the W, pick one. And it's a very soft or weak K. Rush where, rush where, rush where. And an example inside of a word, question, right? We start with that K, and then we release into the W. This one is a stronger K because it's at the start of a stressed syllable, and that's fine. Question. The next rule is what I call blending. Now, there is a technical term in pronunciation called blending, and I don't really think that that's the best term for what they use it for. Instead, I use blending to mean when you have maybe two sounds that come together to create a new sound, right? They blend together to create a new sound. So an example of two sounds coming together to make a new sound would be t plus y, the y sound. Now, this doesn't necessarily work in all cases. It's most commonly used with the word you or your or yours. And so, for example, if you say that you, I think that you are right. I think that your will commonly reduce to your, and then the T and the Y from that and your will then blend into ch. There are uses of this that can sound a bit more informal, especially if you break the grammar, but normally this doesn't really sound particularly informal. It's just a normal part of speech. And instead of blending them, it's also very common to just stop the T. I think that you're right, that you're. And that's an important point here. Remember, American English pronunciation is dynamic, and there is often more than one thing that can apply, especially if we're talking about clearly enunciating for a special reason versus a lot of these rules that will normally apply through speech. And in the case of, say, that you're or that sure, we have two things that can both apply, and it doesn't really matter which one happens. Another example here is d plus y. So here, just like T is voiceless and ch is voiceless, so t plus y is ch, D is voiced, and j is voiced, so d plus y is j. Again, this will most commonly happen with the words you, your, or yours. Might happen with some other words, like maybe year, but it won't always work in all cases. But for example, if I say, did you do it? Did you? It's not informal, it's just a normal way to speak. Did you do it? Now, the next rule is a super big, useful, and important rule, and that is what I like to call shifting. Now, this is part of what is technically called assimilation, but that's a big fancy word, and who cares about that? When you are shifting, this specifically means that you have one sound at the end of one word, or possibly even inside a word, and then you have another sound at the start of the next word. This sound is going to shift to another sound that is similar to the second sound, okay? And I know that's very abstract. So for example, if we say sweet potato, now clearly enunciated, this would be sweet potato, where there's a little T there. You could also stop the T, sweet potato, that's fine too, but if you do those, you're not shifting. If you shift, what's going to happen is that T is going to completely disappear, and it's actually going to become a P, but an unreleased P. So it's like you're going P to P, right? So you go into the first P, you hold it for a second, usually, and then you release the P in potato. Sweet potato, sweet potato. You don't have to hold, but it is very, very common if it's a stop sound to hold it. But in faster speech, you can just say sweet potato, sweet potato. Other examples include good guy, gold moon, wine bar, on my, north south, on camera, might show, should buy, would go. Now, with me saying those as slowly as I'm saying them and as clearly as I'm saying them, they do sound a little bit weird, because remember, if we slow down more, we're likely to enunciate a little more, and then you're going to sort of change back to the original. Should buy, would go, for example. But in the flow of normal speech, this happens very, very commonly. There are some patterns here that are super useful to know. If you have a t, d, or n to the next word, which starts in p, b, or with the lips, then the T, D, or N sound will change into the P, B, or sound. Another pattern is T, D, or N into k, g, or using the back of the tongue. Because remember, these are the three placements in the mouth for the stop sounds. 3 use the lips, 3 use the front of the tongue at the top of the mouth, and 3 use the back of the tongue in the back of the mouth. So we see, for example, with on camera, instead of doing an N here, on camera, which you could do if you clearly enunciate, instead we're going to do this back N, and then release the K, on camera. Or we saw with would go, instead of doing that D, you can just do a G, would go. So this is really easy to remember because we have this middle, right, P, T, K. So we have that sort of middle one, using the front of the tongue here. T, D, N can shift forward to the lips if the next sound is a lip sound, or it can shift back into the back of the mouth if the next sound is K or G. The next category or group of rules is under what I call dropping. Now this is technically called elision, which what the heck does that mean, right? Or it's commonly called omitting. The first rule you've heard me talk about in other places on this channel, and that is the NT plus vowel rule. This is a super common rule, and what this states is that if you have NT and then a vowel, right, at the start of the next word, or also very commonly inside of a word, then you drop the T. Okay, no T, and the N will then connect to the vowel instead. So for example, want out becomes want out. As we're going to see with anti-linking, this is actually a good example here, you can still stop the T. Want out, want out. But if you apply this rule, you drop the T and connect the N. An example inside of a word would be internet. We drop that first T, inner, internet. Next we have the ND plus vowel rule, and this one does not work as consistently or as much as the NT plus vowel rule, but it is something that you will commonly see, especially in faster speech. So for example, found out, you can drop the D and say found out. I found out. Again, you want to be speaking a bit faster here. I found out yesterday. Found out yesterday. Or even inside the word understand. Understand. I don't understand. Next we have ND plus consonant, not vowel. Again, between words and inside of a word. So for example, instead of saying found some, you can say found some. Found some. That D just disappears. Next we have consonant plus T plus consonant. Many of the rules in the dropped sound category will apply to T at the end of a word. It's probably the single most common sound that does this. So for example, instead of last night, which we commonly drop the T in ST endings anyway, but if we consider it part of consonant plus T plus consonant in this case, then you still drop the T anyway and say last night. So the S will connect. Or we have left my, left my, left my. Or we can say instead of slept through, like I slept through the earthquake, we can drop the T and say slept through. I slept through the earthquake. This can even happen inside of words, for example, in bankruptcy. Fully enunciated, bankruptcy, C, okay? But we don't really like those three consonant sounds together, so we drop the T. And the last example of dropping, again, is with the T, but in this case, it's just where the T just magically disappears, especially in faster speech. You can always enunciate it, it's fine, or you can stop it, that's fine. But this very commonly happens with common function words. For example, but they, or you can stop it, but they, or you can drop the T, but they. Again, speak a bit faster if you're speaking more slowly, but they don't like it. It might be a little bit weird. That sucks. That sucks, stop it, or that sucks. What size? What size? What size do you wear? About what? About what? The next rule is super short and easy, but you might not have heard about it before. But that would be changing the placement of t, d, or n before th if you use the dental T or dental D replacement for the TH sound. If you have never heard of the dental T or D replacement of the TH sounds, then I have a lesson on the TH sounds where I talk about it in that lesson, and I will be making more content about that specifically later. It's a super common thing that most natives don't even realize they do, okay? And it's super, super common, super natural to do the TH from here instead. And instead of saying this, you can say this, okay? Don't say dis. That's gonna sound very informal and probably uneducated. You wanna do it here. This sounds perfectly fine. Or instead of think, again, here, think. Now, that is how you replace the THs with this dental T or D variation, which otherwise does not exist in English, that dental T or D, only as a replacement of the THs. But if the sound before that, right, at the end of the previous word, is a normal t, d, or n, then what we can do, instead of doing on the or at the, we can do on the. Instead of doing at the, which you can do, no problem with it, or stop the T at the, that also happens. A very, very common thing to do instead is put the T here. You're not actually saying a T here. The T is kind of disappearing, and we're just changing the position. And we're just making it flat here. At, and you kind of hold it for a second, like you're stopping it in that position. At the, at the. This is not something that you have to do if you don't want to, but it is super common, and it actually helps us speak faster and more easily. One more big category before we talk about anti-linking, and this category is extending. That's what I call it. So it sounds a little bit longer. That's what extending means. You're going to make the consonants sound just a little bit longer. Technically, this is called gemination, but you don't have to care what that means. If you already know it, that's what we're now talking about. Now, there are a few very, very important things to know about extending or gemination. And the first big thing is that this only applies to consonant sounds. Vowels do not extend, okay? They do not extend. If you have two vowels next to each other, you have to repeat them. So like go and over, go over. It's not gover, gover. No, it's go over, go over. The big exception to that, it's not actually an exception, but remember, is a consonant and a vowel, and then also the L sound is a consonant and a vowel. The way that I teach it, the light L is a consonant, the dark L is the half L vowel sound, and because they're both consonants and vowels, this can apply to them and it's fine, it doesn't really matter. The second thing that you have to know about extending is that extending actually isn't required unless you're enunciating or you're emphasizing and speaking really clearly. In the flow of normal speech, or especially in fast speech, you kind of don't really have to extend the length of the sound and it'll still sound fine. The third and last really, really big, most important thing that you absolutely have to know about this, and I cannot stress this enough, guys, spelling doesn't matter. Spelling doesn't matter, because there are many words where in the middle of the word, it's spelled with two of the same sound, right? Like stopping or better. Those are never, ever, ever extended. It's just spelling. Always, it's just spelling. Or say for with the M sound, the word immaculate, thanks to Matt for that word. It is not immaculate where you make the M longer. No, it's just immaculate. So if I say fall lightly, you can look at this two ways, either as an extension where we're extending the L, or you can look at it as we're going from that dark L, the half L vowel sound, into the full L, right? Fall lightly. And so it kind of sounds like a longer L because they both sound like L sounds, but that's technically gemination, technically not. It doesn't really matter. Just, you're not trying to say like fa lightly, right? Just fall lightly, fall lightly. Pass some, pass some. If you say, for example, pass some, okay, in fast speech that could mean the same thing, but pass some sounds kind of like pass plus the reduced version of them, which would just be pass some. So we want to sort of lengthen that S, pass some. Pass some salt, please. Some more, some more, some more. More reading, more reading, more reading. Breathe that, breathe that. Breathe that fresh air. But how does this work with stop consonants? Because you can't hold a stop consonant, right? You can't lengthen it. Sure, you can hold two L's and make a slightly longer L, or two S's and make a slightly longer S. But if you say a T, you release it, and then you have another T. Like that time, right? That time we went to the park, that time. You'd have to say both of them. So how do you extend them, right? Now you could say that time if you're really clearly enunciating, but instead what we're going to do in these cases, so if it's a T and a T, like that time, you're going to hold the first T in place just for a brief moment and then push out the second T, that time. Or with a D, head down, stop picking, Rob bought, sick cat, bag goes. And in really fast speech, you can actually completely ignore the first one, let's say the first T or the first P, and just flow through into the regular one. So instead of saying that time, that's normal speech, okay? But in fast speech, you can say that time. Remember that time? Remember that time? But in English, there is one combination that you cannot extend, okay? All the other consonant sounds you can extend in one way or another, whether they're stop sounds or not. But there's one pair of sounds, voiced and voiceless pair, that you cannot extend ever. And that's because of the way that we physically make them. This would be j and ch. You will probably see a lot orange juice, for example. That's a really common example, orange juice. If you try to hold that and say orange juice, it doesn't work because the start of j needs to be in that close. And so if you release it into the j, right, it's d plus j equals j, it's a blended sound. What happens is you release that starting position and then you're just holding j. And so it doesn't work. So you have to repeat it. Orange juice, or teach Chinese. This is with the ch sound, the voiceless version. And now for what I'm sure you've all been waiting for, and what some of you probably just skipped ahead in the video to watch, is anti-linking. So what do I mean when I say anti-linking, and why is it in a lesson about linking? Anti means not or against. Why is it here? Because it's really important and useful to know, and if you pay attention, you're going to notice that natives do this a lot. Now, the general flow of English, right, the rule of thumb that you need to know about is that English likes to flow. That's one reason why we have so many possibilities and we can drop sounds and we can do all this stuff, because we like to generally keep a good flow as much as possible. However, we also like stops. Also stopping with vowels. Yes, stopping with vowels, not just the stop consonant sounds. First, with the consonants, it's more or less always possible to stop, whether it's a held stop or maybe a glottal stop, especially with T glottal stop. It's more or less always possible to do a stop, even if it would say connect to a vowel or do this or whatever. It's not necessarily likely, right? Like consonants love to connect to vowels. So if I say that is, that is, that is, right? In this case, it becomes a flap D because it's American English, but still we have a connection instead of that is, right? But depending on the way that we're speaking and how the chunks are coming out, right? The way that maybe we're processing the information, we kind of pause sometimes and this and that. In the flow of real dynamic actual speech in a real conversation, you're going to at least sometimes hear that we will go ahead and use those stops, even though normally we might not. Okay, so that's one thing that you want to listen for from natives. More importantly, how does this apply to vowels? In English, it is possible to start a vowel sound without a stop. Okay, so if I say I, E, O, Okay, especially in fast speech, or if there's something before it, obviously we can just flow into that vowel. We're not going to just stop it. But technically, English vowels actually start from a glottal stop. So we don't usually say I. This actually feels kind of uncomfortable. I say I. You can hear that release. I don't like it. I don't like it. You're probably going to start hearing this everywhere now that I've mentioned it. Eat your dinner. Eat. We have the stop on the T there too. Eat your dinner, or eat your dinner, like we talked about earlier. Or we're probably not going to say eat your dinner. Eat your dinner. Again, maybe if we start really fast, eat your dinner. Eat your dinner. It's okay, but we really like to start from that stop, especially if we're speaking a little more slowly or enunciating. So the enunciated version of vowel sounds is actually starting from a glottal stop. All vowel sounds is actually starting from a glottal stop. All vowel sounds. Even the L colored, all, or the R colored, R, not all, R. Do not try to memorize all this. Try to notice these things. That's the first step. Now, if you're ready for another lesson, there's going to be one right here for you. So thank you guys so much for watching another English Hacks lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.